Hi guys, it's Summer here, and today I'm gonna talk about all the books I read in January. I'm gonna do my January wrap up while I'm wrapped up, because I'm funny like that. I have 6 books to talk about today. 5 of the 6 books I read were like middle grade books. 1 was an adult book, and yeah, I don't have anything else to say, and I'm wrapped up, so yeah, let's go. The first book I read was the last book in the Charlie Bones series by Jenny Nimmo. This is a series that I grew up with. I never actually read all of it. I only ever knew about the first 2 books until like a year ago. Anyway, this is called Charlie Bone and the Red King. Like I said, it's the last book in the series, and it disappointed me. I'll get into that once I've summarised. I'll summarise the first book. Hi, it's me from the future, because I completely fucked up the summary for Charlie Bone because I'm incoherent and I couldn't figure out how to summarise that. So we're going to do it again now. This follows a boy called Charlie Bone, whose grandma from his dad's side of the family, Grandma Bone, has always been extremely disappointed in the fact that he's ordinary. And the worst thing is, Charlie's very happy to be ordinary. Grandma Bone has always wanted him to have this thing called an endowment. An endowment is a magical power, and it's like a disgrace to her that he doesn't have one. Because the Bone side of the family always have endowments. Because if you don't, you're a loser. So Charlie's living his normal life until one day there's a mix-up with a photo that he paid to get printed, and he ends up getting this photo of a man holding a baby. And while Charlie's looking at the photo, he starts to hear voices coming from the photo of what was happening at the moment the photo was taken. Grandma Bone is delighted. She revels in this, because this means she can finally send him to Blaw's Academy, which is a school for people who are endowed. But also, what mystery is linked to the photo that Charlie got sent by accident? And what does it have to do with the sinister academy he's now attending? Da-da-da. Okay, I'm done. Bye. But anyway, it's an amazing book. It's by a Welsh author. I mean, the whole series, apart from the last book, which the one that I read, is amazing. And there's so many great characters in it. Just the way they're written, it's definitely the author's strong suit, is writing characters. So this is the last book of the series. It's the one I read in January. My only problem with it is the fact, the ending, the climax of the entire series, it's much like my problem with Queen of Nothing from the Folk of Air series by Holly Black. So much build up to this fight that would happen at the end. And then the fight was crappily described. And I understand this is a middle grade book, but it's actually got to the point where I'm not entirely sure what happened in some scenes where there was kind of action in the book. There was a sword fight at one point, but I wasn't entirely sure what happened. It wasn't clear. The way it was written wasn't clear to me, which was strange. And then for the final kind of battle scene at the end, it was just very underwhelming. I feel like it wasn't described very well. It could have been done better. Harry Potter, for example, that's got good fight scenes in, but it's still a fairly young book. There's plenty of other young kids' books that are like that, but this just wasn't it. There was nothing. I was just so bloody emotionless, and the fight was over so freaking quickly. And the descriptions, there's just the descriptions for the fight scenes just weren't good. It didn't make you feel anything. You didn't worry. It was kind of all telling instead of showing. And I was just I don't care. I mean, we've been building up to this for 8 books, but I just literally could not give a crap. Yeah, I would still recommend reading them, the whole series, because of just the characters in it and the world building, because it centers around this academy called Blaw's, and you have all these characters with different powers, a boy who can touch clothes and feel the emotions of the people who wore them. There's an African boy who can call on the spirits of his ancestors. There's a boy who can summon thunderstorms, and Charlie can hear the voices in pictures. Oh, I don't know. You should just read it. Everything's amazing about it. I don't really know how to speak about this book, but I didn't like the ending because it sucked. The next book I read was Timmy Failure, It's the End When I Say It's the End by Stephan Pastis. This is the last book in the Timmy Failure series, which essentially just follows this boy who believes that he's a detective and that he has a polar bear as his sidekick, and it just follows as they get into trouble and stuff. It's kind of in the style of like how Diary of a Wimpy Kid was, only better, because Diary of a Wimpy Kid made me cringe and I didn't like it. I really enjoyed this book. They're very fast to read, obviously, because it's full of pictures as well as words. I have nothing to say about this book other than it was fun to read, and yeah, it was fun to read. The next two books I read were the last two books in the Magic Misfits series by Neil Patrick Harris, The Third Miner and The Fourth Suit. I started reading this series ages ago, but then my local Tesco stopped stocking the books, so I didn't realise more books had actually come out. The first book is The Magic Misfits. The second one is just called The Second Story, which is an extremely creative title. We love to see it. I initially just picked this up, literally just because Neil Patrick Harris wrote it, and I've watched quite a few of his movies, and he played Count Olaf in the series Unfortunate Events. Each book in this series follows a different character. The first book follows Carter Locke, who has run away from his kind of like dodgy uncle, and he ends up in this town called Mineral Wells. So I also failed to summarise the Magic Misfits very well, because apparently it's just one of those days. So yeah, the footage I had was just a bunch of garbage, so I'm going to have to re-summarise it here. When Carter arrives in Mineral Wells, he ends up meeting these three friends who are into doing kind of like magic tricks and illusions. One of them is called Leela, and she's an escape artist, and she lives in this like the local town magic shop that is run by her two gay dads. The story basically follows as Carter befriends these three kids, and together they end up discovering that there's a plot to steal this diamond. This diamond that I think is going to be on exhibit in the Mineral Wells Resort Hotel, and they decide they're going to have to stop the bad guy who's going to steal the diamond. I think I did that without spoilers. I'm leaving again. Bye. Actually, I had a lot of fun reading this book. It's just something fun and like whimsical about the way Neil Patrick Harris writes, and I really enjoyed the characters, and I love the fact that each book was from a different character's perspective. And I actually thought that the last book in this series did a pretty good, like quite a good job of having like a satisfying ending. There were like 2 twists in it. They were like more than I expected. I wasn't sure about like the climax of the series, the climax of like how they kind of defeat the bad guy. It was a bit kind of like, oh, love conquers all thing. I mean, I'm fine with that, but like it's not entirely my cup of tea. Yeah, I don't know if I sold this series, but if not, then Neil Patrick Harris is gay, so you should read all his stories. You should read them all, definitely. I mean, they're middle grade kind of books, but they're still really good. The next book I read is The Colour of the Sun by David Almond. This is about a boy called Davy as he decides one day that he's gonna walk through his town. I don't think there was a particular reason for it. He just decided he was going to walk through his town. His dad has recently died. And soon after David comes out of his house, he discovers that there is a boy who has been murdered. And Davy's like, you know what? I'm going to go and walk through the town and just kind of like ask anyone if they've seen the murderer, because he thinks he knows who it is. David Almond is like a very religious person, clearly. There is so much like religiousness behind it that I'm just like, oh, get it away. Although I did kind of like it, and the twist, well, it was a bit weird. There were 2 twists. I liked the last twist, not the first one. Like, essentially, this just follows Davy as he walks through the town and like meets various people, and they tell him variously like deep things about the world and life and stuff. It's like, okay, not everyone just spills all this random shit to like a little boy. But you know, I get that it's meant to be extremely like religiously spiritual and stuff. He meets this vicar dude who is going to leave the church and pursue happiness. He meets this dude who's got like one leg, and the dude is always giving him sweets, which is like weird, okay, like. And he meets these 2 women who talk about like a stork and like stealing a baby or something. He meets this like other dude who talks about like farming and shit, and I'm just like, bro. And then there's like a spiritual kind of visitation from his dad. It's just that kind of thing. And also, one of the things that did annoy me, because I can't really fault him for like, if David Almond wants to write super religiously kind of books, that's fine. Like, it's just not my sort of thing. But what did annoy me is the fact that David Almond's writing is telling. He doesn't show shit. He just goes like, he walked this, he felt this, he did this. And I'm like, uh-huh. It says he closes his eyes, he breathes so deep, he could sleep here. Just he. And I'm like, I'm sick of the word he. I don't ever want to hear the word he again. Ever. Like, never, ever again. I don't want to hear it. It's like that for the whole book. It's essentially just he does this, with the occasional kind of sprinkling of other things. But it's just he. And I'm like, I don't want to hear it anymore. But like, I will say, I think it works with like his voice and his like how he writes. But it just kind of irritated me because I don't class that essentially like necessarily as good writing, because it's all just telling me things. But I think it worked for the story that it was in. It's also like, I don't like spiritual things, but at the same time, it hit me, and I was like, oh, but this is like a story, and it made me feel things, even with all these like issues I have with it. But like, it still made me feel things. Read it if you want. I'd say it's worth reading if you feel like it. I'm going to end this video on a sour note. The last book I read was The Magician's Lie by Rhea McAllister. This is about a magician called the Amazing Arden, who essentially is famous for cutting a man in half, on stage. Until one day, her husband ends up found dead and cut in half under the stage after one of her performances. Yippee. And so this police dude called Virgil, an unfortunate name, takes her into custody and starts questioning her. The story follows the whole night in which he questions her, and she tells him her life story. Would have been useful to know before I picked up the book because it was fucking boring. And the ending sucked. And it was a piece of shit. And I can't think of enough insults to like capture how much I hate this book. I want to do a full review on it. I'll be brief about like why I didn't like it. It started out okay. I'm not entirely sold on the writing. It starts out, with her being taken into custody, and she starts telling this story about her life, about this psycho of like a cousin she had and how she had to run away and all this shit. And then it got like fucking boring because it was just like her life. Just like nothing was happening in her life. I mean, apart from like her building her kind of career as a magician. I thought this was a murder mystery. It's not. I mean, it kind of is, but like it's just essentially her boring life. How she meets a dude and like falls in love and shit. And the twist was like so fucking convenient. It was just so convenient, like how everything happened, and it just felt like such like a cop out. It's like a boring twist. I thought it was going to be something interesting. I had a whole fucking theory plotted out because I was only in this book at this point to find out like what happened with her husband. I didn't care about anything else. I just wanted to know what the twist was to see if it was worth me sitting through all this boring crap. A good like chunk of like the middle of the book is just her traveling around in shows. And I'm like, I could not give less of a fuck about her traveling around in shows. I don't care. She's like a YN. Empty shell. She doesn't exist as a person. All the characters are boring. The most interesting one was her psycho cousin, but even then he didn't make much sense as it was, but like, I mean, he was insane. Yeah, I hated this book. You should not read it. I mean, you should if you want to suffer, or if you like to read about people's boring lives. So those are all the books that I read in January. Yeah, I really hated that last book. I don't have anything else to say. The video is over. Bye.